Hello there, weary traveller, and welcome to this cosy corner of history. Before we begin our journey back to the brutal winters of medieval times, I wanted to extend a warm greeting to you, dear listener. Whether you're nestled under the covers, ready to drift off to sleep, or simply looking to unwind with some quiet historical storytelling, I'm so glad you've chosen to join me tonight. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. It's always such a delight to see the diverse community of history enthusiasts gathered here. And if you enjoy this style of calm, immersive tales from the past, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss the next installment. But for now, let's allow the stresses of the modern world to melt away as we travel back to a time long ago when winter's icy grip held far more peril than most of us could imagine. A time when the changing of the seasons brought not just inconvenience, but genuine fear for survival. Picture yourself in the countryside of medieval Europe. The last leaves have long since fallen from the trees, and the sun hangs low on the horizon, its weak rays doing little to warm the biting chill in the air. Frosty fields crunch underfoot as a breeze carries the first few flurries of snow. Winter is coming, and for the people of this age, that means one thing above all: hardship. The cold seeps in slowly at first, but it will linger for long months to come. The landscape will soon be blanketed in white, the rivers and ponds freezing over into gleaming sheets of ice. In a time before central heating and well-insulated homes, the promise of warmth is a distant dream for all but the wealthiest. But of course, it wasn't always like this. Medieval winters were not always so brutal, so unforgiving. There was a time when the seasons passed in a more predictable rhythm, when the arrival of snow was met with acceptance rather than dread. But then something changed. The climate itself began to shift, ushering in a period that would come to be known as the Little Ice Age. Lasting from the 14th century all the way into the 19th, the Little Ice Age brought colder temperatures and harsher winters than anyone could remember. The reasons for this change are still not fully understood, but its impact was felt across the land. Crops failed, livestock perished, and the icy winds blew ever harder. One of the most famous examples of the Little Ice Age's fury was the Great Frost of 1709. That winter, temperatures plummeted so low that rivers and lakes froze solid. In London, the River Thames became a frozen highway, with people setting up shop and even lighting fires right on the ice. It was a surreal sight, but one that came at a cost. Many perished from the cold that year, huddled in their homes as the world outside turned to ice. But amidst all the suffering, there were some who found a strange sort of solace in the frigid weather. One such figure was a young Isaac Newton, then a student at the University of Cambridge. When the Great Frost hit, Newton was forced to return home to his family's farm. There, huddled by the fire, he found himself with ample time to ponder the mysteries of the universe. It was during this unexpected break that Newton began to develop some of his most groundbreaking ideas, laying the foundations for his theories on calculus and optics. Who knows what other great minds might have been sparked to brilliance by the quiet isolation of a long, cold winter. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit has a way of seeking out the light. But for the vast majority of people in medieval times, winter was a season to be endured rather than enjoyed. The rich could afford thick woolen clothing, ample firewood, and well-stocked larders to see them through the lean months. But for the peasants and serfs who made up the bulk of the population, it was a very different story. Imagine waking up each morning in a one-room cottage, the air thick with smoke from the sputtering fire. Your breath mists in front of you as you rise from your straw mattress, careful not to disturb the shivering forms of your family members huddled around you for warmth. The cold seeps in through every crack and crevice, numbing your fingers and toes until they ache. Breakfast, if you're lucky, might be a meagre bowl of porridge or some stale bread. The food from the previous harvest is beginning to run low, and you know that the long winter months will only bring more scarcity. The livestock too are suffering, their coats matted with frost as they huddle together in the barn, their breath steaming in the icy air. As the day wears on, you trudge out into the snow to gather what firewood you can. It's back-breaking work, and your hands quickly become raw and chapped from the cold. But you know that without a fire, your family will not survive the night. You think of your children, their small faces pinched with hunger and cold, and you press on. This was the reality for so many in medieval times. A constant battle against the elements, a fight for survival that consumed every waking hour. And yet, even in the face of such hardship, there were moments of resilience and even joy to be found. You see, the medieval world was one deeply attuned to the rhythms of nature. The passing of the seasons was marked not just by changes in the weather, but by a rich tapestry of rituals and celebrations. And so, even in the depths of winter, there were glimmers of light to be found. One such beacon was the midwinter Feast of St. Stephen, held each year on December the 26th. For a brief moment, the rigid social hierarchies of medieval society were turned on their head, with a peasant or serf being crowned the lord of misrule for the day. This lucky individual would preside over a raucous celebration filled with food, drink, and revelry, a rare moment of indulgence in an otherwise austere existence. But perhaps the most enduring symbol of hope in the medieval winter was the simple act of coming together. In a world where survival often depended on the strength of one's community, the bonds of family and friendship took on a profound importance. Imagine, if you will, a small village huddled against the snow. The smoke from the chimneys mingles with the leaden sky, a sign of life amidst the barren landscape. Inside the homes, families crowd together around the hearth, telling stories and sharing what meagre scraps of food they have. There is a sense of unity here, a shared sense of purpose in the face of hardship. Neighbours trudge through the snow to check on each other, bringing extra firewood or a pot of stew to those in need. In the flickering firelight, faces are lined with weariness, but also with a quiet determination. They have survived winters past, and they will survive this one too. And so, the long, cold months march on, the snow piling higher and the ice growing thicker with each passing day. But even in the darkest depths of winter, there is a glimmer of hope on the horizon, for the people of medieval times knew that no matter how brutal the season, spring would come again. They watched for the first signs with a keen and practiced eye, the slight lengthening of the days, the softening of the earth beneath the snow. And when at last the thaw began, it was celebrated with a joy and reverence that we can scarcely imagine today. Plough Monday marked the official end of the winter season, a day when work in the fields could begin anew. The ploughs that had lain idle for so long were brought out and blessed in elaborate ceremonies, a symbol of the renewed cycle of life. As the first furrows were cut into the earth, there was a palpable sense of relief and gratitude in the air. Life had been hard, yes, bitterly hard at times, but they had endured. Through the long dark of winter, through the hunger and the cold and the gnawing uncertainty, the people of medieval Europe had held fast to the promise of spring. And now, as the land began to thaw and green shoots pushed their way towards the sun, that promise was fulfilled. It's a resilience that is hard to fathom in our modern age of convenience and comfort. The idea of facing such relentless hardship year after year is almost unimaginable. And yet, there is something deeply humbling in the knowledge that our ancestors did just that. They faced the brutal reality of their world with a strength and fortitude that is nothing short of remarkable. They found hope in the darkest of times and joy in the simplest of things. And in doing so, they left us a legacy of resilience that echoes down through the ages. So, the next time you find yourself shivering on a cold winter's day, take a moment to remember those who came before. Remember their struggles and their triumphs, their sorrow and their joy. And above all, remember the unbreakable human spirit that carried them through even the harshest of winters. Because in the end, that is perhaps the greatest lesson we can learn from the medieval world. That no matter how dark the night, or how cold the wind, the promise of spring is always waiting just around the corner. And with that, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the brutal winters of medieval Europe. I hope that these tales of hardship and resilience have brought a new perspective to your own experiences of the season. May you always find warmth and comfort in the bonds of family and community, just as our ancestors did so long ago. And may the promise of spring light your way through even the coldest of nights. Thank you for joining me on this cozy corner of history, and remember, if you enjoyed our time together tonight, I'd love it if you'd subscribe and share these stories with a friend. There are so many more fascinating tales to explore together. But for now, I'll bid you a fond good night. Stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you next time for another journey into the past. Sweet dreams. Transition to more detailed accounts for a longer video. As the brutal conditions of winter tightened their icy grip on medieval society, even the most privileged were not immune to the season's merciless onslaught. In drafty, primitive castles, ill-equipped for the harshest months, royal households faced a formidable challenge in staving off the biting cold and keeping the court adequately provisioned. The logistics of maintaining a royal residence during winter were nothing short of staggering. Massive quantities of firewood needed to be stockpiled to fuel the roaring hearths that provided the only source of heat. The kitchen staff toiled ceaselessly to preserve meats, grains, and vegetables that would sustain the court through the long, lean months when fresh fare was scarce. Servitors scrambled to seal every crack and gap to keep out the insidious chill. But even the most diligent preparations often proved insufficient against winter's relentless assault. In one particularly chilling tale, a medieval queen is said to have tragically perished from exposure within her own palace walls. According to chroniclers, Queen Elizabeth of Hungary was found frozen in her bed one bitter January morning in 1326, a victim of the very castle that was meant to be her refuge. As grim fates like these demonstrate, the spectre of death cast its ominous pall over the medieval world in winter's dark depths. But even amidst such bleakness, the indomitable human spirit endured and found cause to rekindle hope. For much of the populace, that faint glimmer came in the form of the Feast of St. Stephen, a cherished midwinter celebration falling on December the 26th. This day marked a brief respite from the unending drudgery and privation of peasant life, a rare, sanctioned opportunity for revelry and indulgence. Central to the feast was the tradition of misrule, a ceremonial inversion of the normal social order. For this single day, a commoner would be appointed the Lord of Misrule, granted temporary authority to preside over the merriment and issue playful edicts to his betters. However fleeting, this act of Saturnalian license provided a vital pressure valve for the simmering tensions and resentments bred by the oppressive feudal hierarchy. The rigid lines between lord and vassal blurred for one mirth-filled day, where all could partake as equals in the feasting, gaming, and carousing. The sense of community fostered by such celebrations was more than mere diversion. It was a critical survival mechanism. With winter's cruelty threatening to break both body and spirit, the bonds of fellowship and goodwill forged during the Feast of Stephen and similar revelries helped sustain the populace through the leanest times. One chronicle from 1377 recounts the poignant tale of two peasant families, neighbours whose meagre winter stores had been exhausted long before spring's arrival. On the verge of perishing from hunger, they pooled the last of their tattered resources to share a humble meal on the Feast of St. Stephen. That gesture of generosity and unity gave them the strength to endure the season's remaining ravages. Such acts of compassion formed the very marrow of medieval society in winter. When a helping hand extended to a frostbitten traveller, or an extra log given to a shivering widow, could spell the difference between life and death. The grim, shared purpose of weathering winter's onslaught together shaped a culture of interdependence that defied the era's often ruthless stratification. But even the warmest expressions of conviviality and fellow feeling inevitably cooled as winter's unrelenting misery stretched on interminably. The Feast of Stephen was but a small flare of light and levity amidst the frozen darkness, a momentary reprieve before the bleak slog of January, February, and March. As stores dwindled, bellies hungered, and the cold crept past the most assiduously stoked hearth, the faint promise of distant spring seemed to fade into impossibility. And yet, year after arduous year, medieval society endured against all odds. Through unimaginable adversity and hardship, they clung to existence, upheld by the grit, fortitude, and fellowship forged in winter's unsparing crucible. As the land lay dormant and the sun retreated, they somehow found within themselves the tenacity to carry on. One can only imagine the flood of profound relief and joy that greeted the first tentative signs of winter's passing. The slight softening of the frigid air, the incremental lengthening of daylight, the hopeful drip of icicles yielding to the sun's strengthening rays. After months of unremitting struggle, the sight of the season's initial lost battles against the forces of light and life must have seemed nothing short of miraculous. For the battle-weary tillers of the earth, no day was more welcome than Plough Monday, the traditional start of the agricultural year, falling on the first Monday after Epiphany in early January. It heralded the ground's imminent thawing and reawakening. Though the deepest rigours of winter had yet to fully release their stranglehold, the ritual preparations of Plough Monday offered a tangible talisman of hope, an assurance of winter's inevitable loosening and spring's return. One can picture a patchwork of furrowed fields slowly emerging from the receding snows and frosts, the newly harnessed draft teams leaning into the first tentative overturning of the frigid clods. With each sod upended to greet the strengthening sun, medieval man dealt another blow to winter's retreating sovereignty and proclaimed his dogged persistence in the face of nature's caprice. We in the modern world, with our central heat and electric blankets, our well-stocked larders and resilient infrastructure, can scarcely fathom the immense fortitude required to endure the unremitting brutality of a medieval winter. If the season's impositions seem daunting to us now, from the cosy remove of our temperature-controlled bubbles, how incomprehensible must true winter suffering be? And yet, when we grumble about the minor inconveniences of a delayed flight or a rain-snarled commute, perhaps we would do well to reflect on the unyielding misery experienced by our forebears during those interminable frozen months. What reserves of resilience and tenacity they were forced to draw upon year after arduous year simply to survive. Their ability to eke out moments of celebration and fellowship amid such unrelenting privation seems nearly superhuman to modern sensibilities. That they not only withstood winter's ravages, but managed to find slivers of light in the all-encompassing darkness is a testament to the indomitable spirit that slumbers within us all, waiting to be roused by hardship's clarion call. So, the next time we feel our modern discontents starting to chafe, perhaps we would do well to cast our minds back to the icy plights of our predecessors. In remembrance of those who came before, let us embrace the opportunity to tap into our own dormant reserves of grit and forbearance. And as we nestle gratefully into our warm beds, let us spare a thought for all those who fought winter's bitter siege, armed only with the weapons of will, fellowship, and undying hope. As the new year dawned and Plough Monday festivities faded into memory, medieval life settled back into its familiar winter rhythm. Short, frigid days and long, frosty nights were the hallmarks of the season. The fortunate retreated to the meagre warmth of smoky hovels and draughty manors. For the less privileged, winter meant a constant battle against the elements just to survive. One of the greatest winter hardships was the ever-present threat of sickness. In the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time, disease could spread like wildfire. The common cold was an uncommon misery, leaving sufferers red-nosed and bleary-eyed, but far more serious illnesses also stalked the populace. Influenza was a fearsome foe, striking down young and old alike with its telltale fever, chills, and aches. In an age without vaccines or effective treatments, flu outbreaks could decimate entire communities. The winter of 1557 was particularly brutal, with a virulent strain of influenza raging across Europe. In Paris alone, over 10,000 souls perished. Pneumonia was another stealthy killer, preying on those weakened by hunger or other illnesses. The winter dampness seeped into the lungs, causing them to fill with fluid until the victim essentially drowned. Crowded living spaces provided the perfect breeding ground for pneumonia to run rampant. It was not unusual for multiple members of the same family to succumb, leaving orphaned children and shattered lives in its wake. Even royalty was not spared the ravages of winter sickness. In fact, disease often spread even more rapidly in castles and courts due to the constant flow of people in and out. A visiting dignitary or pilgrim might unknowingly bring pestilence along with their entourage. Henry VIII lost his beloved wife, Jane Seymour, to postnatal complications, likely exacerbated by the poor hygienic practices of the age. Children were perhaps the most vulnerable of all. Harsh weather, meagre rations, and unsanitary conditions combined to make winter a truly dangerous time for the young. Infants born in the cold months faced an especially precarious start to life. In London in the 1500s, fully half of all children did not survive to see their 5th birthday. One poignant practice of the age speaks volumes. The custom of bone lace involved tying a black ribbon to the hand of a seriously ill infant. Should the child pass away, this ribbon could then be used to secure their burial shroud, a somber reminder of winter's deadly toll on the most innocent. With danger lurking both outside the home and within, winter was a time to batten down the hatches and pray for survival. For those of limited means, even the basic comforts of shelter, food, and warmth could not be taken for granted. The icy grip of winter poverty was relentless and pitiless. Firewood was a precious commodity, with strict laws governing the gathering of fallen timbers from forests. A peasant family might huddle around a makeshift fire of dried dung and straw, striving to eke out some feeble warmth. Shivering livestock shared what heat there was, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Food supplies dwindled to a meagre subsistence of salted meat, dried peas, and coarse bread. The autumn harvest bounty was a distant memory, and the first shy greenery of spring was still months away. Foraging for winter nutrients meant scouring the stark landscape for hardy fare like nettles, wild garlic, and mushrooms. The scarcity of fresh vegetables in winter made for some very dreary dinner pots. A typical pottage might contain peas, beans, salted pork, and, if lucky, some foraged greens and wild onions for flavour. Tasteless and tedious, but enough to keep body and soul together until spring. For many, even this unappealing monotony was an unattainable luxury. Storms, droughts, pests, and other calamities could obliterate food stores, plunging entire regions into crisis. The Great Famine of 1315 was a particularly harrowing time, caused by relentlessly heavy rains that rotted crops in the fields across northern Europe. Contemporary accounts paint a chilling picture of desperate people reduced to eating dogs, horses, and even human flesh in their hunger. Parents were said to have smothered their starving children as an act of mercy. Corpses littered the streets and fields, too numerous for proper burial. Although this famine was remarkable for its severity and scale, localized crop failures and food shortages were an ever-present menace. A medieval winter diet walked a tightrope between subsistence and starvation. It was a time of hunkering down, with the knowledge that things would likely get worse before they got better. Beyond basic survival, winter affected every facet of medieval culture. Leisure, religious worship, and even crime and punishment took on the unmistakable stamp of the season. The sheer drudgery of scratching out an existence in the bitter cold coloured all aspects of life. Socially, winter was a time of drawing in and relying on the bonds of family and community. The cheery gatherings around the Yule log gave way to more sedate pursuits. With travel treacherous and daylight scarce, people looked inward for amusement and enrichment during the long, dark evenings. Telling stories and singing songs helped to while away the hours. The flickering light of rushlights or tallow candles illuminated scenes of sewing, weaving, and whittling. With idle hands seen as the devil's playground, industriousness was more necessity than virtue. Winter's confinement, at least, provided ample time for such gainful activities. For the literate, winter offered a chance to curl up with a good book, although this was a rather exclusive club. In England, at the close of the 15th century, a humble tradesman's library might boast a Bible, a book of hours, and perhaps some merry jests or tales of Robin Hood. Only the wealthy could afford the lavishly illuminated volumes so prized by bibliophiles. Those who could read often did so aloud for the benefit and entertainment of the whole household. Winter was a time for sharing treasured stories of brave knights, canny tricksters, and star-crossed lovers. The chivalric adventures of King Arthur and his court were perennial favourites, their intricate plots and noble themes helping to transport listeners far beyond the close confines of their winter refuge. Less wholesome entertainments also served to liven up the tedium of winter days. Gambling with dice was a popular pastime, often leading to heated tempers and empty purses. The clatter of knucklebones and the rattle of dice would ring out in many a tavern and great hall as fortunes were won and lost. Drink was another common winter diversion, the fermented comforts of ale, mead, and wine helping to boost both body temperature and spirits. Public houses saw a roaring trade, offering fellowship, entertainment, and an escape from the bitter cold. Inebriation often led to looser tongues and lower inhibitions, sparking lively debates, bawdy songs, and occasionally a brawl or two. The short, dark days of winter also lent themselves to quiet reflection and spiritual contemplation. The church held great sway in the medieval mind, and winter was a time for drawing closer to God. With agricultural work at a lull, more time could be devoted to prayer, penance, and good works. The traditional nativity plays and pageants of Christmastide gave way to more sombre devotions as winter deepened. The pious might undertake pilgrimages to holy sites, braving the harsh conditions as a sign of their commitment and devotion. Others spent hours in hushed churches, fingering rosary beads, numb with cold, and meditating on their eternal soul. Charity was also an important winter value, with almsgiving seen as a Christian duty. The 7 acts of corporal mercy laid out a blueprint for generosity. Feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the homeless, clothing the naked, visiting prisoners, comforting the sick, and burying the dead. In a season of scarcity and hardship, small gestures of human kindness could make all the difference. Of course, winter's harshness sometimes brought out the worst in human nature as well. Crime tended to rise as desperation set in, and opportunities for theft increased, with people spending more time indoors. In close quarters, tempers often frayed, leading to a spike in assaults and other violent crimes. The medieval justice system was ill-equipped to deal with the seasonal surge in lawlessness. Trials were often delayed until the weather improved, leaving the accused to languish in dank and overcrowded jails. Punishments could be harsh, with fines, floggings, and even executions meted out to those found guilty. But even in the face of winter's bleak realities, the indomitable human spirit endured. People found small joys and moments of levity where they could. The distant promise of spring sustained them through the darkest and coldest nights. The lengthening days of February brought a welcome reprieve, with the feast of St. Valentine on the 14th. This ancient pagan fertility rite, Christianized into a celebration of love, was enthusiastically embraced by the people of the Middle Ages. It was a bright spot of warmth and tenderness in the very heart of winter's depths. The custom of drawing names for Valentine's sweethearts was well established by the 15th century. Eligible ladies and lads would gather to draw slips of paper from a bowl, sealing their romantic fate for the next year. These annual pairings often led to merry flirtations, and sometimes even marriages. Flowers, sweets, and sentimental verses were common tokens of affection exchanged between Valentine's sweethearts. The simple act of receiving a handmade card from an admirer could set hearts aflutter, even in the chilliest weather. Winter, for all its woes, could not freeze the fires of love. As the feast of St. Valentine passed into Lent, the austerities of the season intensified, but there was a sense that the worst was now behind, and brighter days lay ahead. The snowdrops and crocuses, poking their fragile heads through the frost, offered tangible evidence that winter's icy reign was finally weakening. Throughout the Middle Ages, the relentless cycle of the seasons shaped every aspect of life, and no season stamped its mark more firmly than winter. It was a time of privation and hardship, when mere survival was an achievement. And yet, it was also a time of resilience and quiet fortitude in the face of the harshest of elements. Medieval winter was a test of the human spirit, a proving ground for the values of faith, family, and community. The winking icicles, frosty meadows, and snow-covered fields may have been a postcard-perfect scene, but the realities of the season were anything but picturesque. However, this crucible of snow and ice and want also forged a people of remarkable grit and endurance. The Middle Ages were built on the backs of those who could weather the very worst that winter had to offer, and still find reason to hope for spring. There is perhaps no greater tribute to their stubborn vitality. So, the next time you find yourself bemoaning a delayed train or a slushy sidewalk, spare a thought for your medieval ancestors. Unequipped with thermal socks, central heating, or weather apps, they faced each winter as a battle to be fought with every resource at their disposal. And they emerged victorious, spring after spring. We are the heirs and beneficiaries of their tenacity and unbreakable spirit. And with that, I will leave you to your warm bed and electric blanket, secure in the knowledge that winter has been largely tamed, thanks in no small part to those who came before and showed us how it's done. May your dreams be of gentle snowfalls and toasty hearths, and may you wake to a world where winter is more friend than foe. As the weak winter sun struggled to pierce the leaden grey clouds, the people of medieval Europe shivered and drew their meagre cloaks tighter about their shoulders. The icy tendrils of winter's grasp seemed to creep into the very marrow of their bones, chilling them to the core. For the poorest peasants, the cruel irony was that their ragged woolen garments, which felt so oppressively hot and sticky in the sweltering labours of summertime, now provided scarcely more warmth than a gossamer veil against winter's biting onslaught. They huddled together in their hovels, thankful for the meagre heat thrown by a smoky fire, their breath misting in the chilly air. The animals felt winter's bite too. The elderly draught horse, ribs protruding beneath its shaggy coat, dreamed wistfully of the long-gone lush summer grass as it ate its rationed wisp of hay. The milk cow lowed mournfully, udders chapped and raw in the frigid draughts that knifed through the barn walls. Even the wary barn cats looked a bit less haughty, their usual disdain blunted by the gnawing in their bellies and the frost on their whiskers. Yes, winter was an especially trying time for the lowest rungs of medieval society. But even the nobility, cocooned in their grand, draughty castles, were far from immune from the deprivations of the season. Many a blue-blooded maiden wailed in despair as her priceless silk gowns proved useless against the dank chill of stone walls. The castle kitchens strained to concoct enough piping hot delicacies to stoke the noble innards. It is said that King Henry II of England, felled by a severe case of the winter shivers, once burned an entire chair just to warm his royal posterior for a blessed moment or two. His servants despaired, knowing His Majesty's temper was liable to ignite even faster than the furniture if he remained uncomfortably cold for long. But for peasant and king alike, winter seemed to grind on interminably, an unrelenting slog of frozen misery. The only respite came from the occasional celebration or feast day, brief islands of revelry in the dark ocean of winter. The people seized upon these moments of light and levity, cherishing them like a drowning man gasping for air. Perhaps the most anticipated was the feast of St. Stephen on December the 26th, a day of unbridled merriment and delightfully subversive reversals of fortune. By ancient tradition, a mere peasant was crowned the lord of misrule on this day, gleefully lording over his betters in a delicious bit of sanctioned rebellion. One can only imagine the raucous peals of laughter that rang out as the lowliest serf ordered about the local baron with mock imperiousness. For one glorious day, the normal rules and hierarchies fell away, and all revelled together as equals. The frigid drudgery of winter seemed to recede, driven back by the bright blaze of communal joy. But soon enough, the merry festivities would end, the misrule would be righted, and the cold, hard reality of winter would descend once more. The people would trudge back to their hearths and their chores, the bite of the wind seeming to mock the fleeting warmth of fellowship. The battle against winter's grim siege resumed unabated. And yet, even in the bleakest depths of winter, there were quiet acts of courage and compassion that melted the hoarfrost from even the most careworn hearts. Neighbours,